morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning for this important discussion. I am very grateful that the people at Reconciliation Canada, also at the Indian Residential School Survivor Society, were able to begin this project in order to try to create some understanding about the issues that we're facing today. I'd like to acknowledge that we have with us today Chief Dr. Robert Joseph, who is the Ambassador of Reconciliation Canada, and Shelly Joseph, who is the CEO of Ladders to Kindness, has also joined us today and will be helping guide us through some of this session. With that, I'd like to pass that on to Shelly and ask you to open up the session with us in a more traditional way. Galakesla.
Galakesla, nugodi hekwagil ogwalachnacha hegums umpas quinquin kuligedzi wakas bumpas quintilog. My traditional name is Hekwagil Ogwa. My English name is Shelly Joseph. I am the founder and lead trainer with Ladders to Kindness training. I am the youngest daughter of Chief Robert Joseph. And I have been connecting with Reconciliation Canada to help bring people together in this time of deep mourning as we think of the 215 children that were found in the mass grave at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. It's so devastating to think that there are children who never went home. And my deepest intention for this work is to let those children know that they're loved, that despite their experience on this earth, they're loved. And so I'm going to sing a love song. Before that, I just want to say that Reconciliation Canada, Ladders to Kindness, and one of the offices for the Indian Residential School Survivor Society is here on the Coast Salish territory. Specifically, Reconciliation Canada and Ladders to Kindness is on the village of Tk'emlups, the Capilano Reserve of the Squamish Nation, and we're forever grateful for their amazing hospitality. The song I'm going to sing says, "So big is my love for you, my precious one, that I cry." And today, I sing that in honor of you children and their families who never weren't able to ever bring them home. So this is the love song. Lambs Thank you, everybody. I do want to say just a quick prayer for all of us, because the content that we're going to be talking about and sharing and being in that space together with is really difficult. We are in fact grieving for 215 little children. Creator, we ask that you be with all of us today across Turtle Island, that we can sit intently in our hearts and connect in spirit to one another, so that we can honor these 215 children that are in that grave that was found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School Band, so that they know without a doubt that we love them, and that they know that they mattered to us, and that we are all connected, that we're all Namwayut in my language. We are all one. Fill us with your love and your light and your intention to grow that love among us to those children and all the other children who went to these schools. Kelakesa.
Thank you, Shelly, for sharing that beautiful song with us and for helping us to set the tone of this gathering today. I really, again, want to thank everybody for joining us. And I also really want to acknowledge the content that we're going to be discussing today is quite disturbing. And so we've had some warnings as we're going through this process, but I want to share again that if you are not emotionally prepared to hear some of the work, we suggest that this would be a time that people can log off. And if you do have challenges as we move through this discussion, there are a number of helplines and information that is available to assist you on our website at reconciliationcanada.ca. With that, we will begin part of the discussions today. As I said, my name is Karen Joseph. I am the CEO of Reconciliation Canada and the eldest daughter of Chief Dr. Robert Joseph, and my mother, who is a matriarch within our nation, Donna Joseph. Before we begin, as Shelly had mentioned, we really want to take a moment of silence to honor the children who never made it home, and for the survivors who are no longer with us, and for all the children that we know are out there that haven't been brought home yet. So if we could just start this with a moment of silence where people can reflect on why we're here, be able to set yourselves up to be prepared to participate and to listen. And Galikasa. Again, I really want to thank you all for joining us. How this gathering came about was we had been listening, and all of us, of course, at Reconciliation Canada, paying attention to the news that was going on, and listening to some of the commentary. And, you know, we had recognized this. This is a story for many of us who have been involved in this work, that we know has been a reality for a really, really long time. And it's one thing to know that, and then all of a sudden to have it become real, to have that truth confirmed. And this was one thing that was always a little bit contentious for people at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Although there were a number of reports that indicated children that had passed within those schools, we always knew that there was an undercount of that, a significant undercount. And so the announcement, the discovery on Thursday, was the first time that, what do we call it, whispered knowing was made real. And it's had a tremendous impact, not only on us, but more especially on survivors and the intergenerational survivors. And there are so many people who are asking, what happened? How could this happen? And we wanted to be able to answer that question. The other piece of it is we didn't want these children to go without being noticed, without being honored. And we wanted to recognize that although these are the 215 that we're talking about today, that, as I mentioned, that is whispered knowledge. We know that that exists across this country. And we also know that although those children that we are referring to right now went to the Kamloops Indian Residential School, we know that all of those children were not from Kamloops. That was the nature of residential schools. It was to take our children as far away from our homelands as we could. So many of those children came from other places as well. And we really wanted to acknowledge that the grief is not localized into that community. And it is a huge burden that they are carrying right now. And we wanted to be able to try to help and lift them up and make society aware of why this is so significant. It's a moment in our history that changes the way we think about who we are as Canadians and what is our responsibility for all of this that has happened. Because this is not a historical event. This continues today. The loss of our children and the loss of our people for no other reason than the color of our skin. And so part of that, what we wanted to do today was to begin to enact what we would do within our cultures when we acknowledge our mourning, when we have lost someone that we love. Today is the first day of 4 days that we will be having gatherings to honor this. Today is the day where, when we find out that we've lost someone at home, that we're having a gathering of our family to explain what happened. I didn't know this was going on. What happened? And so that's really the purpose of today. Tomorrow, we are asking all of those in the ecumenical societies and all of those who have their own spiritual practices to take time out of their day to have prayers for all of these children, to say our prayers for these 215 little kids that were lost in this tragic way, for them and for the families who never understood why they didn't come home. We're going to be talking about that today. And so we really want people to engage in that in a meaningful way, to say our prayers and to practice our services in light of these children. And then on the fourth day, which is when we would finally lay our people into the ground for our culture. It's different for every culture, but for ours, that's how we would do that. We're going to be having a grief and loss ceremony, and in order to honor those children and in order to honor the multi-generational aspect of this. And then on the day after, when everybody goes home, as a part of our culture and as a part of our traditions, we are going to be doing a handshake and inviting everybody to participate in that in order to help those people that are on the front lines of this work all across this country, but especially for the Indian Residential School Survivors Society, to be able to help them access some resources, because this has opened up something that has lied dormant for a long time, and we are not prepared. Our organizations are not prepared to address this. Many of our organizations who are providing services right now already exist on extremely limited budgets, as we all know. And now those limited budgets are being stretched to the max, and people don't have the capacity to carry this on for any length of time. So we're asking that people help them by contributing resources. Just like we would do at home. It doesn't matter how much you have. You would give $5 or $20 or whatever it is to help those organizations that are addressing this issue on the front line right now. With that, I would like to introduce you to Chief Dr. Robert Joseph, who, as I mentioned, gave an interview on CBC yesterday. And it was the first time, and we've been doing this work for a long time, that I've ever heard my father, Chief Joseph, become emotional in the way that he did. And so that's when I knew, given his resilience, what that will be doing in a really deep way to other survivors. And the survivors have done their work now. They've left a legacy for us to pick up. And so I really wanted to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge the work of the Indian Residential School Survivor Society. And with that, Chief Joseph, I'll open up the floor to you.
Thank you, Karen. Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy that you're able to join us and we become one in thought and intention around this really, really tragic news. When I first heard of the mass grave at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, I was really stunned. Then I became numb, and I was in a fog for a little while. I just couldn't. It was hard to take. I thought about all of those precious little ones who were so loved by their own parents, their own families, their communities. And I said, how could it be that this happened to them? It was never their fault. It never should have happened. And I thought about my own time in a residential school, and I was as small or as young as they were. And then I just broke down, and I had to cry. And I think as a nation, as Aboriginal communities, we have to push really hard to bring this chapter to full light so that we can appropriately mourn and grieve. Because for those little children at Kamloops, they didn't have that opportunity to be put away appropriately according to our own customs. And I'm sure that if all of their parents are still here, that is absolutely unfinished business. So for all of our leaders and the organizations working on this issue, along with Canadians, we have to find a will to work together to bring this to a level of comfort. So I'm really, really pleased that you're here. I want to remind everyone that is shocking and hurtful and numbing as all this, that we have a long way to go. But I want to thank those of you on this line and others who may be thinking about what happened, that I'm grateful for what we have achieved. Even if we can't quantify it or describe it fully, I know that these little children's lives will not be in vain if we can forge a society that will never allow people to harm each other. So there's another light been shone on this really, really dark episode of our chapter. It's also going to be a light in leading us to being better and more loving and caring for each other. My hope that sometime when this process is close to conclusion or completed, that all of us in our own way find a way to mourn and to grieve and to honor these little children and all others. To the survivors out there, have strong hearts, continue to desire the best, that you are worthy and you have purpose and you belong, and that we can all move forward together. I thank the people at Kamloops, those who are working on this issue now, and I think of the community there. And I know that some of them may be feeling bad about this mass grave being in their property, but it wasn't your fault either. We're just so happy that you discovered this and that we now can all work towards creating some degree of closure. Closure won't be instant, it will be incremental. And so it'll be dependent on every individual moving along the spectrum of mourning to determine where closure happens. So I think that's all I have to say for now to the survivors. If you're triggered, please reach out to your friends and others and crises lines like the Indian Residential School Survivors Society and others. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dad. I've truly admired the grace that you carry yourself with in these difficult times, and I'm really honored that you have grown and healed so far in your own journey, that you're able to express your feelings. I remember a time in my life before saying I love you was a thing in our family. And it's because of your leadership and Mom's leadership, and the two of you having the courage to do that really hard work that you've done to heal from your experiences at residential school and the Indian Act and all those other things. But I just wanted to take this moment to say thank you for that leadership in that heart space.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Dad mentioned the Indian Residential School. We are co-hosting these events for the next 4 days with the Indian Residential School, Ladders to Kindness Training, and Reconciliation Canada. The Indian Residential Survivors Society have been doing this work for well over 20 years. In the beginning, my father worked there as well before he came to Reconciliation Canada. And they've been rooted and grounded in the healing and supporting residential school survivors on this difficult journey. And I want to hold my hands up to the survivors and to the Indian Residential School Survivor Society for laying that groundwork for everything that has happened since they've been there through the entire process, through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, through the settlements, everything. They have been there supporting our survivors. And that's a huge, huge undertaking. They offer grief and loss counseling, crisis counseling, trauma counseling, clinical therapy, art therapy, alternative healing therapy, energy healing, emotional support for people in the settlement process, family and group counseling, basic life skills coaching, educational workshops on a broad range of health issues, traditional healing methods and medicines, traditional foods, sourcing and preparation, crisis supports. I do believe that since the announcement of the 215 children that they found in that grave, that they've been inundated and flooded, and their staff is working to full capacity and then some. They've extended their crisis line to 24 hours, and that will maintain until at least Sunday. But they need to be mindful of taking care of themselves too. So I just really wanted to talk about them and the work that they're doing. And I'm sending the Indian Residential School Survivor Society team so much love and holding you in prayer and holding you in such high regard. I just want to take this opportunity to lift you up for the good work that you're doing. For the survivors and the intergenerational survivors and everybody who's deeply impacted by this recent discovery of those children.
Thank you, Shelly, for sharing that. As we mentioned earlier, this has been a hard journey for everybody, you know, and we sat down and we talked with a number of people over the past few days, trying to determine what are the things that people need to know, you know, and even within our own team, because we have a very diverse team, and the fact that there has always been this whispered knowledge, and so I think for me personally, that's going to be the most important part of where we're going, is beginning to talk about those stories, talk about some of our understandings of what's been going on. As Shelly mentioned, Chief Joseph has been involved in this from the very beginning for more than 25, almost 30 years now, pushing forward on the Truth and Reconciliation items, but moving forward in helping survivors. And it was survivors that actually made the Truth and Reconciliation Commission happen. We need to really understand what this means. We're seeing today, you'll hear that saying all over the place, the purpose of those Indian residential schools that were created by the Canadian government and run by the churches was to kill the Indian in the child. And we know that when we do that, we actually kill the child. And so we're seeing the devastating effects of that now. We're seeing, and we've always experienced as Indigenous people, those that have emerged from that system, from that horrific system, the impacts it's had on them and their ability to function well in a world that clearly did not want them. And we also talk about the survivors and their stories and the time before the school. Whenever you've experienced a traumatic event, there's your sense of time changes. There's a before the event, and then there's after the event. And so we'll always hear survivors talking about that. And then you'll hear them talking about their friends in school. And I really want to remind everybody that when you see these survivors like Chief Joseph, who are now in their elderly years, they were small. They were 4 to 6. They were taken away for years. How could this have happened? How could we have found these children and not known that they were there earlier? Well, it's because their names were changed when they were there. This was not a regular school. They did not go for 8 months and then get to go home. This was not like a boarding school situation. They were forcibly removed from their communities, from their families. Many of them in the early stages loaded up on the railways, the cars on the railways. If you're from the coastal places, they were loaded up onto boats and barges and taken into these communities. If you were in some of the really isolated places, they would send in planes, if they had them, to come and take these kids later on in life. If you lived in places like Kamloops, they would bring cattle trucks there to put those children in and to take them away. And they weren't permitted to go home in some of those times. And as soon as they walked into the door, there is a rationale for how we design our buildings. But every residential school across the country has the same design as you walk into the school. There is a vestibule, if you will. There's an entryway. There's the doors that lead out to the outside. There's a collection area, that we'll call it that. And then there's a second set of doors, which is when you actually go into the school. And when they're taken into the school, when they're in that vestibular area, they were given different names, most often numbers. I know the numbers of my parents, and that's how they were referred to for the remainder of their time there, whether that was 1 year, whether that was 10 years, whether that was 12 years, that was their number. And so even if parents came to come and find them, there was a line that we hear often: "I'm sorry, there is no child here by that name," because their names had been changed to numbers or to different names. And so you'll hear stories of the children staring out the windows, after having been all excited to see their parent, to then watch them go away. And so the parents weren't able to know what happened to their children. And many of their families, while they were in there, passed from the level of grief that they were experiencing. And so even when they came out, there was still a disconnect from their language, disconnect from their culture, disconnect from their sense of spirituality, which, as we know today, are all of the things that create resilience within us as Indigenous people. Those are our strengths, especially the piece when we talk about culture and language. That is how we connect to our spirituality. And so without that, we really lose that piece. I am so grateful that you're all here. We are, as I said, trying to answer that question: what happened? How could this happen in this country? And I want to remind everybody that we do have a link on our website to mental health services. It's at reconciliationcanada.ca. People have also been asking, how do we get involved? How can we help? And so, as we said earlier, we are collecting funds to help the IRSSS and other frontline organizations, in particularly, to up their services so that they can actually help all of the people that are coming forward. This is a mass mourning within Indigenous communities. There's a wave of grief and sorrow that has gone through because this is our families. These are our children. And we all know what happened in those schools, even if the rest of Canada doesn't necessarily know. And so if you want to donate to help this work, it's something that you can do right now today. Please go to our website, Reconciliation Canada. There is a link there called Get Involved. And from there, you can donate. That's our donation page. And it's also, there's also a link on our Facebook page for this. We will distribute those resources. Any of the resources that we have will go to the IRSSS and other organizations as well, so that we can ensure that those people that need that help will receive that help in a timely manner, and they don't have to go through the process of managing all of those donations. They can just do the work. So we are really here assisting as an organization. With that, I'd like to invite Shelly to come and share a little bit about that intergenerational impact. You know, we keep saying that this is not a historical event. As we're talking about this, I think about the kind of attitudes that it took for our government, for the churches to be able to implement something like this, for the police services, because that's who came in and took these children away, for the Indian agents. What were the prevailing attitudes of that day? And then I think about what happened to that young lady who went to the emergency room recently and was in a very critical state. And instead of receiving care, videotaped, recorded in her last moments, the racist comments and the negligent treatment that she received in that emergency room instead of care. It's going on every day. And that's why it's so important that you're here, because we really want people to understand, to begin to see Indigenous people as human beings, to begin to see Indigenous people ourselves as a part of our common humanity, that we are all linked together. We all love our children. We will do anything for our children. And so I really want people to be cognizant of that. And with that, I'm going to invite my sister back again to share a little bit about her experiences as an intergenerational survivor.
Thank you, Karen. It's never an easy thing to talk about how I was impacted by our parents going to Indian residential school, especially if you know them today. I know a lot of you that are watching know my dad, and you know how amazing he is, how gentle and loving yet powerful he is, and that he has played a huge instrumental part in leading the country really in this journey that we've been on since raising the awareness of Indian residential schools and the experiences that they had there. When we were growing up, both of my parents never talked about what happened to them at the Indian residential schools. It wasn't until my dad began working at the Indian Residential School Survivor Society back in the 90s, I believe, that he even led us to maybe think something happened to him at the school and that it wasn't good. And it really wasn't until we began working at Reconciliation Canada that I actually heard, or when I read their statements, found out some of the awful things that happened to them at these schools. And when I found that out, it really made my life make a whole lot more sense. When we were growing up, we never said, I love you. It wasn't a common thing in our family. There wasn't a whole lot of hugging, although I think I was the most huggy in our family. It may have irritated my non-huggy people. But we had to learn those things along the way, how to say I love you and let people know that I love you. I remember when I was a young mom talking about this, that it was years before we were affectionate with one another, talked about feelings with one another. My dad decided one morning, oh, we have to do this. It's now or never. And we sat down at breakfast and he said, today you're gonna tell me how you feel. And that was our introductions to feelings. That was so long ago. But I really understand that now, that because they were in these schools from such a young age, day in and day out, they were at the school with the staff and their other little cousins who were experiencing the same devastation they were. There were no grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles saying, I love you to them. They didn't have parents to say, good job, I'm so proud of you, or you matter, or to express that you belong. Daily, my parents heard, you're a stupid little Indian, you're a dirty little Indian, you don't matter, shut up, you're wasting my time, you're wasting my space, and you're never going to amount to anything anyways. And that really shaped how they parented, because really we're all just role modeling from the generation before us. And so if you think of it like that, there's generations and families all across Canada who are still experiencing that brokenness that all of these little children experienced at Indian residential school. They grew up and didn't know how to be parents because they didn't have the role models to teach them. There was nobody to show them this other way of being. And I really hold my parents in high regard that in the late 70s, they both embarked on a journey of beginning that healing way back then. And they both continue to do work to be open, to be teachable. And that set an example for me as a young mother myself. I had my first daughter when I was 20. And I hadn't done a whole lot of work on my own until then. When all growing up, I said, I'm never going to be like my mom because she was quiet. She never fought back. And back then, before the healing took place, my dad was angry. He was rageful. And my mother just took it and never fought back. So I kept telling myself, I'm never going to be like my mom. And I never wanted to be with a partner who was like my father. And when I was 20, I had my first daughter. When she was about 4 months old, she was sleeping in a bassinet beside my bed, and her father was in the bed with me. And I picked her up and I looked at it, this light bulb went off in my brain, and I realized that I had become my mother. This man that I was sharing my life with at the time was like my father. And I lost my voice. I didn't know how to stand up for myself. And my light bulb moment was that I didn't know how to be any other way. I had no other role models. All of my aunties and uncles that were in our circles at that time were living the same lives that we were. So I had no role models in how to love myself and how to stand up for myself and how to command or demand respect. And so I looked at my 4-month-old daughter and I just started crying, and I told her right then that I'm going to do everything I can to break this cycle, to learn how to be a better mother so that I could show her how to love herself, how to value herself, and how to walk in this world, to be love, to give love, to be loved. And she's 31 now, and I've been on this journey with her and my other two children, and doing my best to be open to all the people that come into my life. I truly believe they were brought to me so that I can learn something from them. And so I'm always open to those teachings, always, so that I can continue to better myself, so I can share that with my children and then someday my grandchildren. And that's my hope, that the work that my parents started, that I can't say enough. Thank you. And that he's so integral in my children's lives as well. This hasn't been easy. Healing isn't easy, but it's oh so worth it. And, my dad continues to be self-aware, and as hard as this has been, Dad, I know that, together we sit in these tears, but the two of us know that we're going to be okay because we have each other and we have the kids here. In our culture, there's a teaching, there's a saying, there's a way of life that says, but if not for our children, what would our purpose be? And if my dad and my mom can stand up and have the courage to heal, to share their stories in the hopes of creating a better world for all of our children, not just me, not just Karen, but all of our children, all of our grandchildren. That's the hope that the survivors had. Who am I not to do everything I can to carry that on for my children, my grandchildren, your children, and your grandchildren? Who are we not to do that same work, to be the example for them and how to move forward from this tragic, tragic history that we have? And it's not history. Children are still being taken from their homes. Children are still dying in the foster care system. They're being lost and falling through the cracks. This isn't history. This is still so relevant. And we have so much work to do in that healing. And I just want to ask Dad if you can share a bit about that healing part and that hope.
Yeah, thank you, daughter. I'm really moved by your courage to share our story. It must be hard to even remember some of the traits and the things that I exhibited during your younger years. And I'm really sorry for all of that. I was so full of anger. I was so full of rage. The only way I knew how to respond to anything was to drink. And eventually I became a pretty practiced drinker, to the extent that I lost you and Karen and your other siblings and my wife, Donna. And that was, I think, the turning point for me, the most difficult days of all my life, even more difficult than the first and last day at St. Michael's Indian Residential School. And I drifted off into a deep, deep binge. So many days of drinking. I ran into a friend of mine, Sandy. God love him, Sandy Billy. I used to fish with him earlier. So I ran into him and he said, Bob, he said, I don't like what you're doing to yourself. You've got to get out of town for a little while, get away from this. Come out come fishing with me. And I said yes right away because I knew how deeply I was in trouble. So he said, go down to the boat, you know where it's tied up. It's the same spot we've always tied up in, and go and sleep it off. I will, I said. And I didn't come to until the next morning. I opened my eyes. I was sleeping on his bunk on this boat. Didn't know how I'd gotten to the boat and when we'd left or whatever. But I opened my eyes, and the spirit of alcoholism took over. I could smell the booze. I could feel the despair and the brokenness. I looked around and everybody was sleeping in the forecastle, and I was so ashamed of myself. I got off my bunk and I snuck through the engine room to the galley, to the back of the boat, just hiding, trying to get away. And when I got to the back of the boat, I threw myself on the deck behind a big drum and I said, God, help me. And as soon as I said that, it wasn't really a prayer at that moment. I was angry at God at that time. But as soon as I said, God, help me, I could see. I looked over the gunwales of the boat and I saw the stretch of water between us and the other side of the other shoreline. And that water was so powerful, so beautiful. It had energy running through it. It was coral blue, green. And I raised my sight and I saw the forest, and it had lightning going through it. And it was lush, so thick and lively. And soon I looked up to the sky, the heavens. And when I had my eyes gazed there for, I don't know how long, millisecond or maybe longer, I saw the whole universe, like the galaxy. It's indescribable. And I heard this voice say to me, in spite of what you've done to yourself, I love you, and you're a part of all of this. And then I came back to the moment, crawled back to my bed, slept until we fished. And I've looked back on that moment many times in my life. And I realized that in that one moment, I heard this voice, that I was being responded to in a way that allowed me to feel that I belonged, that I was loved, that I had purpose, that I had value. Those are all of the things we lost in those schools. And so I'm so happy about that. I just want to say one more thing. We keep hearing about people saying, get over it. We must not get over it. These stories are valuable. Canadians have to hear it. We have to hear it. Our children and the generations have to hear it, because it becomes a part of the basis for our society, to know everything about it, about itself, all the strengths and weaknesses, the things that are bad, the things that are bad, the things that we can do about it. And so we can't forget it. And you know, these 215 little souls that we grieve for today, they're helping us to remember that story, because far too many people were wanting to move on. So I thank those little ones. I know they're at peace now. They're in the embrace of the Creator. And one day all of us will look back, or maybe it's a generation after us, look back at this, and we will recognize the strength and resilience and the love and the kindness that belongs to all of us, that will help us to create a new way forward. I want to ask all of our friends, non-Indigenous friends to continue to stand with us. When our children are loved and respected and they benefit, your children will know, and they too will be loved and respected and benefited. And we can actually create that society that is Nimwit. We are all one with each other. So I won't get a chance again to say it, but thank you to all of you. Keep bringing forth the message of hope and love and light for each of us, and that we need each other to get to that place where every child is safe and cared for and respected. That's all I have to say for now.
Thank you to both of you for sharing your stories. It's always difficult to hear, and it's a reminder of why we're in this work, of why we do what we do. Change is hard, but it's a privilege. It can take you on a journey that you didn't even know was possible in your life. I can tell you that, I didn't come into reconciliation with open arms. I came in kind of kicking and screaming a little bit. And it's been a tremendous journey. It's been a tremendous journey. And the hardest part of it is recognizing that we too deserve love, that we too are worth taking care of, that we too have a responsibility to carry on the legacy that these survivors have left for us. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada was not paid for by Canada or the churches. It resulted as of the largest class action lawsuit against Canada in its history. They won that. And part of a significant portion of the restitution that they received as a result of the violence experienced within the residential school system, they used to fund the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, so that our children, so that these stories, these truths would remain on the historical record. And that is also why having these conversations about these missing 215 children, the remains of these 215 children are so important, because it's an additional piece of that historical record. It's a confirmation of what I told you about before, is that whispered wisdom. And I have to say that change, I really want to appreciate each of you for joining us on this, because change doesn't happen unless we recognize that there's a problem. That's step one, and that we understand what that problem is. And so I really appreciate everybody who's been able to join us here on this, for having that courage to come and listen to these hard truths and to be reflective about, okay, now I'm beginning to understand. Now, what am I going to do about it? The beautiful thing about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is that they kind of laid out a little bit of a map, the very, very, very beginnings of a map. And we wanted to acknowledge that and take some time to speak about it a little bit. So part of this is for the provinces to release those statistics that they know on the children who actually died within the residential school systems. Those were not released to our people during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we want everybody to work with the churches to for the federal government and the churches and communities and survivors to work together so that we can have an online registry of those cemeteries and those grave sites, so that we have places where we can go to mourn. That's part of what we're trying to do here is heal that history that we have. This is not about scraping a wound and letting it and to keep letting it fester. This is about releasing some of that. That's why learning to cry, learning to breathe, learning to take care of yourself is so valuable, and it's fundamental. We hear about these things that Shelly referred to earlier as we go along these healing things. So many of us that have that traumatic experience, one of the first things I learned in my healing journey was how to breathe. You know, I had spent my entire life in so much activation, I'll call it, that I only breathed from above. I didn't know how to breathe into my belly. I didn't know how to like take a deep breath, because that's what brings you calm. And so I really wanted to acknowledge the tiny steps that each of us have to take as we move through this moment of change, this opportunity of change. And I also wanted to talk about some of the more of the calls to action. We, you know, one of the things that I think is really, really necessary, and you know, we've spoken to a lot of people about it, are those commemoration opportunities. We need to have places to go that recognize this history, not in the backs of buildings, but in the front lawns of some of those significant sites within Canada, Parliament Hill, within the provincial offices and all of those kinds of things. And, you know, one of the most important things is really, as I said earlier, to begin supporting the organizations in some meaningful way. Most of us exist on, I really appreciated what my one of my colleagues shared with me, so I wrote it down. We're expected to deliver caviar on a bologna budget, right? And we end up feeling like beggars trying to address an issue that we didn't create, and we're given pennies to try to make that change happen. And so again, I'm going to ask that any of you that can, if you can please support the work that our organizations are doing, especially in this time of crisis. I ask that you share that request out to all of your friends. Many of us are only one person, but we have followers oftentimes and links to people that number in the thousands. And so I'll ask that you share that and make a specific request to them to share that as well, so that we can get this message out. I also ask that you join us over these next 4 days, because it's not mourning. This is about the what happened part. That's this part of the conversation. Tomorrow is going to be about the spirituality, about making sure that we are building that resilience, and we are doing that in ways that are culturally relevant as we progress on this journey over these next 4 days. Again, I wanted to mention the websites. If you are able to share even just small amounts, we're not asking, you know, very few of us are millionaires, so even just a little bit helps. To the IRSSS specifically, their website is irSSS.ca/donate. For Reconciliation Canada, ours is reconciliationcanada.ca/get-involved/donate. So if you can please do that, that would help us a tremendous amount, and help everybody to create change. And we're also, you know, just continue to show up. Just continue to show up and to be reflective and to engage in this work, knowing that it's difficult, but knowing that there is such possibility when you can think about that love, when you can think about the power of love. We talk about, my father spoke to rage. When something like this emerges, that rage tries to reveal its ugly head, because we see this every day. And it's saddening and it's frustrating. And when it's your own kids, you want to rile up and turn into that grizzly bear mama and protect those people. But the rage actually, if held on to, begins to fester within our own bodies. And the only thing that overcomes that rage, the only thing that overcomes that disconnect that we have from one another is love. Love is what we need to grow in this process. Love for ourselves, love for our children, love for our families, love for our communities, and love for one another, regardless of the race, regardless of the sexual orientation, regardless of gender, regardless of all of those things. We are all human beings. We have a shared humanity. We are all one. We are all relatives with the earth, with the animals, with one another. And we are better together. And we grow closer together through love. So my sister always likes to say this, if you get nothing out of these things, if you leave here today and you don't remember a word that we said, what I want you to leave with is 2 words: grow love. That's what's going to make us, lead us through this tragedy, lead us through this history. So with that, I think we've come to the end of our conversations today. I would like to invite Shelly and then to say a few words, and then Chief Joseph to say a few words just in closing. Again, to thank you to everybody, especially to our team at Reconciliation Canada. It's been, and all of those teams that are in this same state, you know, they just show up. We've been working, you know, I think we were comparing how many hours of sleep we got over the last couple of days. And I'm sure all of those organizations that are doing this are doing it in the same way. And I'm so grateful that everybody continues to show up and to be supportive in this time of urgency. So Shelly, I'll send that off to you. And thank you again to everybody for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. It's been a real honor to co-host this with Reconciliation Canada and the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. Great people. I have nothing but love and respect for the work that all 3 of our organizations do. I want to leave everybody with ideas on how you can take care of yourself today, understanding that we're still in a pandemic, there's still restrictions and lockdowns, and to compile this grief on top of those isolating factors that we all have to live in right now. It's hard when we grieve. We know we gather as Indigenous people, and we can't do that right now because of the pandemic. So I want to encourage you, like I said in the beginning, I put it in the chat, please drink water. That's not a suggestion. I'm saying please drink water to keep yourself hydrated. When we're grieving, we lose so much of that through our tears, through our breath. So please, please, please drink water. Other things you can do for yourself. I don't know if you meditate, but meditate. If you have recordings of traditional songs, just turn them on, but gently and quietly, and let that feeling of those songs, the intention of those songs, just sit here and in your stomach. If you're able to get out, if you're mobile, I encourage you to take your shoes off and let your bare feet walk through the grass or through the sand or through the dirt. or even into water, the ocean, the stream. But as long as your feet are touching Mother Earth and literally get grounded, that helps. Also, because we can't gather with our normal medicine people who do brushings for us, I've been telling people, go for a walk in the bushes or in the forest, or if you have one tree that's on a path somewhere, walk by and let those branches brush you off naturally, and have that intention in your mind that you're being brushed off, to let go of some of this heaviness, to let go of some of the negativity, to let go of that rage that's boiling up in a lot of people, and let Mother Nature brush you off. And like Karen said, breathing is so important, and especially when we're in grief, it's hard to breathe. So I'm actually going to bring us through just a quick, simple breathing exercise, and we can do it all together. And knowing that we're sharing this breath of life to honor one another as we grieve these 215 children. So wherever you are, if you're able to, put both feet on the ground and sit up straight so that your spine is kind of centered. And we're going to take a couple of deep breaths together. It's going to go in your nose and as deep as you can. Hold it for 2 seconds and exhale through your mouth. And make sure that your exhale is longer than your inhale was. But as you exhale, I want you to imagine your breath taking out the stress in your body, wherever it is, wherever you feel that tension, that deep grief, let your breath just take it out for now. And that's the intention of us breathing together in this moment. So we're going to take a deep breath in our nose, hold it for 2 seconds, and then release through our mouth. Okay, inhale. And exhale. And let your shoulders drop, relax your jaw, let your tongue leave the roof of your mouth, and we'll inhale again. And exhale. One last time. And in closing, I'm going to sing a song. This song was composed by the late Chief Frank Nelson. It was then given to my father, Quinn Kuligetziwakias, Chief Robert Joseph, who has since handed it to my oldest daughter, Stephanie Thompson, Quinn Kolasuwilok, and now she holds this song. It is called Ganya, and it speaks to the Thunderbird, who was our first ancestor, coming to guide us and carry us over these hard times. And so today I offer this song for those 215 children, that they know that all of our ancestors are with them, our ancestors with them, and all of us here, that our hearts are with them. I also offer this song to all of you, that our ancestors help us get over, to carry on this work and to keep going forward all together in a good way. So this is Ganya. Oh, Gaya, hey, 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 oh, Gaya, oh, ah, hey, ah. Oh, Gaya, hey, 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 oh, Gaya, oh, ah, hey, ah. Hey, oh, oh, Kania, imas kasua, hey, oh, Kania, imas kasua, hey, hey, so hey oh ha ya hey 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 oh ha ya ho ah hey oh ha ya hey 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 oh ha ya ho ah hey ya hey ya oh ha ya hey.
Chief Joseph, I'd like to pass this on to you to say the last bit of words for us. And I want to again lift my hands in thanks and praise to all of you who have joined us today. I ask that you invite your friends and your family and the people that you know to join us as we continue on this journey over the next few days. Chief Joseph.
I'm so glad that we had this time together. It's been really important to remind ourselves that none of us are alone, that we really need each other. And secondly, to remind us that we are on a journey together. So many of us on this line, people across the country in Indigenous communities and in the bigger society. There are so many of us who have agreed to find a new way forward through the process of reconciliation. And while we're in the midst of this deep, sad moment, we have to conjure up all of our strength and our courage and our vision to continue that new way forward. I know that there are people who oppose the idea, but there are those of us who are committed to doing what we can to bring forward what I consider to be a sacred imperative. It's embedded in our cultures as Indigenous people, the idea of reconciling life and everything around it. And I'm always inspired by that because that sense of direction comes from millennia of knowledge from the ancestors. So I want to thank you for continuing to be engaged, for continuing to hope with you and I and others that we can create a better society, for continuing to inspire the noble idea that every human being is important and valued. I think that even though this is a hard moment, that it's going to deepen our resolve to do even more to bring light and love to this world. There are so many ways, so many pathways to reconciliation, and all of them will contribute to the betterment of our families, our friends, and neighbors. I'm going to close just by saying a brief prayer in Kwakwala. Like Isla, you ikigir me you fi kwiled no kuno. Gat no kwilem gal is lot chota na lachtak ala chos no chayus. Chno hislile. Lama chos no chalaka kwes as it's gonna meet no chayda sasamini sasam kastan. La Kamloops a Jimgi Tola. Well, as Tk'emlups no chi. So la gachno chasi da thawai kano yuthle. Lama had less nina chidi da kin an bidukta. Kamas nukola che olten lach you kulenko. Lo kila kasus. All my relations. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you again to everybody for joining us. I remind you that we will be continuing to do this both tomorrow, on Monday, and on Tuesday. So if you have people that you know that you'd like to join, please let them know. And thank you again, because without you, we're not able to do this work. We're not able to join like this. And I fundamentally believe that Namwayut, we are all one, that act of Namwayut is the superpower of our people. So that's where we get our energy. That's where we get our strength. That's how come we share the breath with one another and with the earth and with the ancestors. So Pela Kesla, I look forward to seeing you join us again tomorrow. Thank you.